Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. Today's video is going to be my final team selection for Game Week 17, and I've arrived at this with the most up-to-date information and also my consideration of the 50-50s that I was talking about in the previous video. If we start with the defense, the only change here is actually I'm bringing Patterson into the team, and the reason why I'm bringing Patterson into the team is simply because I think with Johnny actually being very, very close to coming back to full fitness, as per Lopetegui's recent press conference, you do have a chance now that Patterson will be much more nailed than someone like a Bueno in 3 to 4 game weeks time. You also have the option for Patterson to potentially have a double game week 21. So if there's a crazy scenario where I do plan on inevitably using the bench boost in 21 for whatever reason, maybe there's Brighton double game weeks and more double game weeks to come, and therefore my ability to actually match that is going to be dealt with better with something like a Patterson bench boost, then that opportunity is there, and I think it's much more worthwhile spending that 0.1 to get someone who's nailed in that situation, even if he doesn't have the double game week. As far as the actual rest of the defense, of course, James and Cancelo are players that I haven't really wavered upon. I've talked about Cancelo previously and why I wanted to keep him the structure, but I think it's worth actually fleshing out those arguments once again. And simply my thoughts are that Walker is the asset most people feel like can replace Cancelo at this point in time if you want to plug a hole in that team and get that City defense in place. Ederson is also another option that people have suggested, but I really don't like locking down a keeper position. It's so much harder to move out of a keeper and therefore be flexible around triple City, in my opinion, if I was to book in a kind of transfer towards Ederson now. At the same time, I think there's just too many assets in Sanchez, in Kepa, in Leno as well, that have good double game weeks to count upon in the future. Even single game week keepers such as a Pickford, right? Even if we discount double game week 21 and that potential there for Everton. So in my opinion, you have Trippier and James, who I think are nailed, and Cancelo is someone who's nailed for me. I can understand people moving away from Cancelo, but I just feel like with him being rotation prone, and when you look at someone like Walker, he just has no involvement when it comes down to bonus. I can understand players going for maybe a punt over Stones and Laporte, hoping that Stones will get a lot of minutes over this run, but I really don't think there's any guarantees with that. Yes, of course, there's going to be some games where you can see Stones gets more bonus points than Cancelo because he makes more passes and completes more successful passes, but usually that's not the case. We know that the way City play, Cancelo actually hogs a lot of the ball, and that's super beneficial for bonus. So when you actually compare the like for like with Walker, I think it's very, very poor. And then with Ederson, you get no save points there as well. So I think that's kind of how I've laid out my defense. White is going to stay there. The interesting thing about starting this week is I've actually gone for Trippier to start, but I actually mentioned on Twitter that I might be tempted towards moving towards Ben White, and that's still a 50-50 for me, but I'm not going to change my team selection. It's going to be exactly the same as it is. My bench order might just change. And the argument about Trippier versus White is simply about effective ownership, because I think there's an equal trade-off here where Trippier, of course, has the much better attacking edge, even though they're both playing right backs in their system. We just know that Trippier operates much more as an attacking fullback than someone like Ben White, who plays a much more, almost like a third center-back type-ish role for that team, whereas he does whip in 1 to 2 balls at a time, but most of his assists have actually come from just simply passing it towards a midfielder, as opposed to someone like Trippier, who's actually constantly finding people in spaces and also is a set-piece threat. So Trippier, I think, is probably the safer option to go with. I think there is a bit of an effective ownership edge here with Ben White, where if you want to go against the grain, go against the population, you can absolutely just start White over Trippier, and then play Trippier next week, where he has a great chance of getting a clean sheet. I just think Leicester have been fantastic towards the friendly so far, so the chances that Newcastle keep a clean sheet, I think, are relatively low, and the gambling odds do support that, and that's why Ben White has a little bit of a trade-off there, where Arsenal have around 43% of keeping a clean sheet, and then Trippier has around 28% to 30%. So nothing too substantial, but the trade-off is probably quite equal in these games, because I don't think Newcastle will completely overwhelm a team like Leicester, who've actually been very, very great at keeping teams at bay from the offensive point of view. As far as the midfield, if we move into that, that's one of the big 50-50s for everyone in FPL so far. The debate about Salah and De Bruyne, and there's two ways you can conceptualize this debate. You can independently look at these two assets, look at Salah and look at De Bruyne and compare the two, or also think about how that reflects your team structure, because a lot of people are now moving into a team structure like Salah plus Foden, and then I suppose the counter argument is going to be something like KDB plus Saka, and I think Saka is actually probably as good as, if not a better asset than Foden, because Yes, Foden might start this game because he was rested in the EFL Cup, but if you project this team long term, there might be a lot of game weeks and fixtures where Foden will miss out a lot of minutes. We also know that there's situations where even if Foden starts, there's a very high likelihood that he gets subbed off at 65 minutes if, let's say, he's having a very ineffective game, where someone like Saka will always get that expected minutes edge over him. He's going to play 90 minutes a game. You also have that security blanket of penalties over a longer fixture run, and I don't see myself using a wild card until later on this season, something like Game Week 28 and beyond. So the way things are set up now, I do think De Bruyne is probably the more interesting asset because he also reduces one future transfer. Salah to De Bruyne is probably a nailed transfer for people who have Salah in their team. So that means starting from Game Week 17, you might think that Salah has a 3-game week run that's actually better than De Bruyne, but you'd probably move into De Bruyne in Game Week 20 when he has that double. So I would say I already have plans towards moving to some Brighton assets to try capture and capitalize on their doubles themselves. So I don't really see the value of going out of someone like KDB and moving and starting my team with Salah, because that's going to be another future transfer booked in. Right now in this 3-4-3 structure that I have in place, I have Andreas who I can call upon in Game Week 19. I could probably rest Martinelli there, even though it's not ideal, but I think it makes the most sense at this point in time. And then I also have maybe the freedom of saving a transfer and actually going for Mitrovic if there's a possibility that he's going to play those two fixtures as well, as a bit of a punt over Martial in Bournemouth, but I don't think that's going to happen. But anyways, I save myself that chance because I'm not wasting a transfer, so to speak, on someone like Salah to De Bruyne. And I think the projections are quite disparate. It really just depends on what your conception of KDB's minutes are. There's a high chance, of course, that he might get rotated. We've seen that in the past. I think he was rotated, for example, in one of the Aston Villa games earlier this season, and it was quite a shock to people. I know that KDB is expected to be one of the most nailed assets, but that rotation possibility is still there, and I completely understand that Salah has more minutes. I just think that Saka is a great asset to own, so I would like to view the assets independently, and I still think that De Bruyne is so close to Salah that with the transfer involved, you kind of have to take into account what that kind of negative expected value of a transfer is, and I don't think that it's actually more so than the difference between Salah and De Bruyne at this point in time. So I'm going with De Bruyne. As far as Rashford and Martinelli, these are assets that I really love owning. I think Martinelli, of course, is probably the biggest question mark because he could easily be someone like Almiron in the team. I've got a lot of value saved in Almiron, but that shouldn't really color my judgment because Almiron is someone who's provided so much value at 5.8. We know what he's provided as well in FPL this season. A lot of big chances, much more so than any other midfielders at this point in time. So there is a great argument to say an argument or an asset like Odegaard is even better than Martinelli, because when you're looking at expected goals per 90, actually Odegaard ranks at 0.35, Almiron ranks at 0.33, and then Martinelli ranks at 0.22. So that's actually quite a huge drop off. But Martinelli does have the edge on expected assists, and we do know there will be times this season maybe when Nketiah is unable to play after 65 minutes because Arteta doesn't really value what he's brought to the game, that Martinelli gets pushed into a centre forward position. He might benefit from that too. So I do think that Martinelli still remains as a great asset in my hands, and I just think that Arsenal's run is actually quite good compared to Newcastle's run. Yes, the expected goals conceded of Arsenal's opponents is actually very, very low, and there's going to be that mirror matchup there with Arsenal and Newcastle, but I actually still favor Arsenal in that scenario. So my opinion is that Martinelli is probably still the better asset in my mind over Almiron, and I might probably be making a mistake with that, and I could simply move to Almiron later in the future, but I think that's fine, right? I always have the possibility to move down into Almiron, and that's the beauty of Almiron this season. As far as the forwards, though, this is where we've had some interesting changes as well to kind of finalize this team, and I've gone for Haaland, Darwin, and Martial. I don't think there's much of a discussion to be talked about with Haaland and Darwin. You could obviously mention someone like a Callum Wilson. Why not feature someone like Callum Wilson in the team when Darwin is so expensive? And my argument would simply be that I think Darwin is a much more explosive asset, and I do like tempting myself with the high highs of Darwin compared to someone like Callum Wilson, who's much more consistent, because we can see that Darwin has that expected goals edge. A lot of people have been making these comparisons to Werner, which I think are a little bit ludicrous because Darwin has already matched Werner's kind of goal threat and haul compared to last season in the limited time that he's done in this season, which includes also suspension and also rotation and some injuries as well. So I think Darwin's much better than Werner anyways, and he's shown that from a statistical edge and also just purely with the goal scoring, right? The facts are there that he's pretty much matched Werner's goal haul or goal tally from the previous year thus far. And I think, yes, Darwin has some exceptionally poor finishing as well, But you're still going to have someone who gets 4 to 5 chances and big chances in goal in almost every match that he features in. And I wouldn't say Darwin covers Salah, but I also think that Salah doesn't need to be absolutely nailed in my team. And I do like at least that sort of false image of covering Liverpool in some sort of way. So Darwin is someone that I'm going to prioritize here. I also have some value tied up in him. As far as Martial, he's the big transfer that I've made. The reason why I've gone for Martial is simply because I don't really value Mitrovic any longer. He is going to be a doubt for Gameweek 17. I don't know whether we'll get any more updates from the manager. And my issue with Mitrovic is that you have that yellow card suspension. And then there's obviously the possibility that Martial can be an explosive punt versus Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth. I think those fixtures in isolation are so good, specifically for a United team that actually looked very, very, very hot heading towards the World Cup restart. And specifically when we've seen Martial play within the friendly games early in the season, and also when he's actually come back, so in some of the cup games as well, I just think he actually raises the overall floor and ceiling of this United team, so much so that I can see a lot of goals flooding in, and I'd love to get coverage of that in the meantime. Whereas with Mitrovic, there's too many doubts in my opinion with first of all, the yellow card suspension looming, and then also second of all, him being a doubt in Gameweek 17. So I've gone for Martial for now. It also saves me a little bit of money in the future, and that will help me tie up a potential transfer towards Trossard if we need to kind of capitalize on Brighton in the future. I've not gone for Sanchez. I've not gone for someone like Dunk for now because I really just don't see the value in it. Yes, I think maybe the biggest glaring issue in this draft is maybe the lack of Shaw and the lack of Mount, but I feel like double United is some sort of coverage towards Shaw. We also know that Martinez and Varane are still doubts for Gameweek 17, so that's already one fixture kind of down from the clean sheet perspective. I think Nottingham Forest have been valued as a very, very poor team, but from the attacking perspective, I think they're very capable of scoring a goal. When it comes down to other assets that I've missed out, such as Mount, I really feel like I'm not that sold on Chelsea, nor have I been that sold in Mount overall this season. I think Sterling is a much better asset. Yes, of course, much more pricey, but I can see more value coming from him because I've already seen glimpses of greatness from Sterling, even though a lot of people will suggest that he's been terrible this season, which fair enough. I mean, that's just an opinion. But that's going to be my team so far, and ultimately you're not going to get everyone included here. I think we have so many fantastic options in FPL. I think all drafts are very much viable depending on your transfer value and so on and so forth. But this draft, in my opinion, covers me towards something like a blank Gameweek 25, where I don't think I'll have too many issues outside of maybe doing some transfers towards Brighton. I don't see the value of a Brighton clean sheet anyways over a double game week, and that's kind of my opinions on this team so far. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.